For you this hour, Belarus today freed over 120 political prisoners in return for the U.S. easing sanctions. They included Maria Kalesnikava, a prominent leader of street protests against Lukashenko in 2020, a human rights campaigner and Nobel Prize laureate, and Viktor Babarika, who had attempted to run against Lukashenko in the 2020 presidential election. While Bialiatski, the Nobel Prize laureate, and 8 other prisoners have gone to Lithuania, 114 of them fled to Ukraine. Here is the U.S. envoy to Belarus.
But that's the reason that the sanctions are there, are mainly because of what happened when most of these people were put in prison. So they're related.
So you expect most of the sanctions to get released, removed after the prisoners are released?
I hope so. I think it's a fair trade.
Well, for more, we're going to speak now to our international affairs editor, Philip Turle. Hi, Philip. So what else do we know then about those who were released and where they are now?
Right, well, this is very interesting. If you look at the timing, it's just coming 12 days before Christmas. So it's like an early Christmas present for the families and friends of all of those who've been released from jail in Belarus. Before we go into the actual reasons before that, there are some very important figures who have been released from jail. As you were saying, Maria Kalesnikava, who is 43, she was one of the key opposition figures in the mass protests in 2020, an ally of the main opposition leader in exile. It was her who went to the border with Lithuania and tore up her passport. She was being kicked out of the country and then walked back into Belarus and was then put back in jail. There have been lots of worries about the state of health that she was in, the way she was being treated. So I think this will be an enormous relief to her family that she's now free. There's also the Nobel Peace Prize winner laureate Ales Bialiatski, who is 63, who's been in prison for 1,600 days. Also, many questions being raised about what sort of state he's in physically. He was in Gorky, which is a notorious prison for its beatings and hard labour. So he's also been set free. Another opposition leader, Viktor Babarika, who was a major challenger to Alexander Lukashenko in the elections in 2020, running for the post of president. And he has also been free today. Now, originally the plan was for all of these prisoners, 123 or so in all, to be released to Lithuania. It now appears that most of them have actually been sent to Ukraine, including 5 Ukrainian nationals. All the others, only 7, and the Peace Prize laureate, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate Ales Bialiatski, has been sent to Lithuania. So that is what has happened today. I think a lot of relief for many of the families there, but this is really a momentous occasion for these prisoners because they've been freed, and something that was totally unexpected ahead of these discussions between the United States and the authorities in Belarus.
Said it was totally kind of unexpected, Philip. So what were the conditions elaborated on by the Americans and the Belarusian government leading up to these releases?
This is also very interesting. This is, as we were just hearing from John Cole, the U.S. Special Envoy for Belarus, who met with Alexander Lukashenko in Minsk. He basically was saying, look, what we're going to do is we're going to lift sanctions, U.S. sanctions on potash, which is a key fertilizer, which is one of the main exports, an important export for Belarus, which will then be able to be exported to the United States. And that is something that will profit the Belarusian authorities. It accounts for about 20% of global potash fertilizer in the world, what is produced in Belarus. So this will be a huge windfall for the country. There were also sanctions imposed on potash by the European Union. Those have not been lifted. And I think more important, the sanctions on the part of the European Union on potash than those from the United States. But I think the underlying message here on the part of the US is that there are links between this and the war in Ukraine, the pressure on Volodymyr Zelensky, the US drive to sort of isolate and divide Europe by saying, OK, we can go and directly and negotiate with the Belarusians. Of course, this is not happening without the agreement of the Russians, who have a lot of impact on what goes on in Belarus and all the decisions that Alexander Lukashenko takes. But it's basically saying, talk to the US. If you do, you can get things done. We're the ones you need to talk to, and that's what's going to happen. So we're talking here about not only these prisoners being freed, the lifting of these sanctions, hopefully more sanctions being lifted in the future, but also this may have ramifications on the peace process that's also taking place in Ukraine.
Philip Turle, thank you very much.